When the First World War finally ended, a French general named Marshal Foch looked at the peace treaty and made a chilling prediction. He said, "This is not a peace, it is an armistice for 20 years." He was off by exactly 65 days. This 1914 map shows why Foch understood the danger. The continent was a room full of empires pointing loaded weapons at each other. On one side, the Triple Alliance: Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. On the other, the Triple Entente: France, Russia, and Britain. Adding to the tension, Germany and Britain burned through cash in a massive naval arms race. Britain had launched a class of megaship called the Dreadnought, making every other vessel obsolete overnight, and Germany was scrambling to build their own fleet to match. The logic of these alliances was supposed to keep the peace through deterrence. If you attack my friend, you fight me too. But these intersecting treaties laid a trap. A minor local skirmish would not be contained. It would immediately drag the entire continent into an industrialized war. The spark finally landed on June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was visiting the city of Sarajevo in Bosnia. A Serbian secret society called the Black Hand was waiting for him. Their first assassination attempt failed when a grenade bounced off the Archduke's car. But later that day, his driver took a wrong turn off the planned route and stalled the engine right on a crowded street corner. Standing right on that exact corner was a 19-year-old named Gavrilo Princip. He drew a pistol, fired 2 shots, and killed the Archduke and his wife within the hour. That single navigational error immediately snapped the continent's diplomatic tripwires. The resulting chain reaction erased millions of lives and set a violent timeline in motion that would detonate all over again a generation later. This timeline tracks how the alliances collapsed inward over just 6 days. Austria-Hungary sent an impossible list of demands and declared war on Serbia. Russia mobilized its army to defend the Serbs, prompting Germany to declare war on Russia and then immediately on France. Germany knew they had to move fast. Their strategy, the Schlieffen Plan, was to swing a massive army through neutral Belgium, loop around, and crush Paris in 6 weeks before turning back to deal with the Russians. But Belgium fought back. The fortress city of Liège held up the advance for nearly 2 weeks, forcing the Germans to bring in enormous 420mm siege guns to blast their way through the concrete. The German army advanced to within 30 miles of Paris, but a massive French counterattack at the Marne killed the Schlieffen Plan. Out of room to maneuver, both sides started digging. By Christmas 1914, a continuous 475-mile line of trenches stretched from the North Sea down to the Swiss border. Life inside those narrow ditches was a daily nightmare. Soldiers lived shoulder to shoulder with mud, rats, and the unburied dead. Men stood in freezing water for days, developing a rotting condition called trench foot. Desperate to break the stalemate, Germany introduced a horrific new tactic in April 1915. At Ypres, they released 168 tons of chlorine gas across a 4-mile stretch of the front line, causing soldiers without protection to choke and blind. The British tried to shatter the lines with brute force at the Somme, dropping 1.5 million artillery shells for a week. But when British troops climbed out of their trenches and walked straight toward the German positions, they were cut down by machine gun fire, suffering 57,000 casualties on the very first day. Out of the disaster at the Somme came a mechanical solution. The British built large armored vehicles designed to cross trenches and crush barbed wire. To keep the project secret, they claimed they were building water tanks for Russia. The name tank stuck. The muddy stalemate forced military leaders to abandon 19th century cavalry charges. In their place, they engineered mechanized armor and chemical agents, the exact industrial weapons that would define the Second World War. The human drain on all sides was staggering. At Verdun, the German army tried to bleed the French dry, producing 750,000 casualties in a single spot. On the shores of Gallipoli, the Allies lost another 250,000 men fighting the Ottomans. That relentless loss of manpower began tearing ancient empires apart from the inside. In Russia, widespread starvation and a collapsing military sparked a revolution in the streets, toppling the Tsar. A man named Vladimir Lenin seized control of the government. He immediately pulled Russia out of the war, signing a harsh peace deal that surrendered a third of the country's population and 90% of its coal mines to Germany. With Russia out, Germany freed up 1 million soldiers to head west. But then they made a fatal diplomatic error. They sent a secret telegram asking Mexico to invade the United States. British codebreakers intercepted the message, and American troops were instantly drawn into the conflict. Knowing American forces were arriving, Germany launched one final, desperate push in March 1918. Specialized stormtroopers punched through the Allied lines and advanced 40 miles. But they lost their elite soldiers faster than they could replace them, and by July, the offensive burned itself out. Following a massive Allied counterattack at Amiens, the Central Powers rapidly collapsed. Bulgaria surrendered, then the Ottoman Empire, then Austria-Hungary. German sailors began mutinying, and the Kaiser finally abdicated his throne and fled to the Netherlands. Finally, the active combat stopped. The guns officially went silent on November 11, 1918, at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. The armistice itself was signed inside an ornate railway car hidden in a French forest near Compiègne. The true cost of the war was calculated the following summer. The Treaty of Versailles operated as a mechanism of territorial and financial vengeance against Germany. This chart shows the brutal conditions placed on Germany. The Allies capped their entire military at just 100,000 men with no air force and no tanks, stripped away 13% of their territory, and handed them an unpayable bill for 132 billion gold marks. On the map, 4 ancient empires, the German, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, and Ottoman, were permanently dissolved. The borders of Europe and the Middle East were frantically redrawn, fracturing into entirely new nations like Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia. Watching this unfold was a resentful former World War I corporal. Over the next 2 decades, Adolf Hitler would build his political career by weaponizing this exact national humiliation to seize absolute power. Marshal Foch saw the flaws in the treaty the moment it was signed. By imposing crushing conditions instead of a stable resolution, the victorious nations didn't conclude the conflict. They simply loaded the weapon that would detonate the Second World War.